Europe summer 1944. The fields of Normandy are thick with smoke, dust, and the churned scars of treads. On the horizon, the dark silhouette of a burning tank. A man in a scorched uniform climbs out of the turret, drops into the mud, and crawls away as flames consume his machine. An M4 Sherman. They called it the Ronson. Lights up first time, every time. Every platoon had stories of tanks bursting into fire at the first hit, of steel coffins littering the French countryside like blackened crosses of war. And yet, if the Sherman was so terrible, why did it become the backbone of the Allied armies? Why did thousands of tankers climb back into it willingly, even when they could have taken captured German wonder machines? The answer is as complex as war itself. In the first weeks after D-Day, American armor met the Panther and the Tiger. Thick armor, long barrels, terrifying silhouettes. On paper, the Sherman didn't stand a chance. Every encounter seemed to end the same way. Sherman burning, crew running, photographer taking the picture. Those photographs became legend. Headlines, letters home, campfire rumors, all repeated one grim phrase: death trap. But the photos didn't show what happened next. That by the next morning, in that very same spot, another Sherman stood ready, fresh and clean. While a single Panther took a week to repair, the Americans rolled 10 new Shermans into the line. Every tanker knew, in a straight fight, the Sherman lost on paper. Armor, 50 meter. Panther, 100 meter. Gun, 75 meter. Panthers, also 75, but firing shells twice as fast. When a German round punched through a Sherman's hull, the temperature inside soared past 1,000 degrees. Ammunition ignited. It ended in seconds. The soldiers joked darkly, "If you're lucky, you'll die before it burns." And yet, post-war studies revealed something remarkable. Of every 100 Shermans knocked out, roughly 60% of crews escaped alive. For the tanks of that era, almost miraculous. Inside, the Sherman was roomier, its hatches larger, its visibility better. It was built for men, not for theory. The Americans understood something the Germans did not. A tank is not just a gun and armor. It is logistics, repair, fuel, spare parts, and men who live to fight again. From the diary of Sergeant Jim Carey, 3rd Armored Division, July 1944. The German tank looked like a cathedral, but when it broke down, it stayed broken. Our Shermans burned, yes, but they moved. We could always count on them starting again. That was the American philosophy: reliability over perfection. A Panther cost nearly 3 times as much as a Sherman. It took weeks to assemble. A Sherman, just a few days. Germany built 600 Panthers a month. The US built 5,000 Shermans. Every part was standardized. Any mechanic could swap an engine. Any repair crew could bring one back to life. "We could build more tanks than they could kill," said General Omar Bradley. To the tanker, the Sherman felt familiar, simple, obedient, almost friendly. It started without complaint, crawled through mud, and could fire on the move. The Panther was magnificent, but fragile, temperamental, hungry for fuel and perfect roads. For the Germans, it was pride. For the Americans, it would have been a trap of their own brilliance. The Sherman never won by brute force. It won by numbers, mobility, and time. While one Panther held off 2 Shermans, a third circled and struck from the flank. And if that one died, another rolled in before the smoke cleared. That was the American edge, the speed of replacement. The Panther won battles. The Sherman won the war. Lieutenant Archie Olds, 4th Armored Division, later recalled, we cursed it every day. But when you've seen how far it can go without breaking, you stop calling it names. You start trusting it. The tank they called a coffin became a companion. It could betray you, but more often it carried you home. After the war, the photos of burning Shermans filled books and documentaries. The Panther, sleek and imposing, became the symbol of German superiority. But the numbers told another truth. For every Panther destroyed, 5 Shermans were lost. But each Sherman cost a fraction as much, and another rolled out days later. In the end, the war didn't end inside a Panther. It ended on the ashes of the Reich, where Shermans had carried their crews all the way to victory. The camera pans across a quiet field. A burned-out Sherman stands alone in the dust, wind and dogs in the distance. A weathered sign beside it reads, "They called it a death trap. It carried them to victory." Germany, 1942. The Man factory in Nuremberg roars day and night. Steel screams under cutters, welders shower sparks in dim hangars. On the drawing boards lies a vision, a new tank, Germany's long-awaited answer to the Soviet T-34, the weapon meant to restore the honor lost outside Moscow. The engineers call it Panther. The Führer calls it a Wunderwaffe, a miracle weapon. They design a machine that must be flawless. 45 tons of steel, sloped frontal armor nearly 100 mm thick, and the KWK-42 L-70 gun, able to pierce a Sherman at 2 kilometers. Every line is geometry, every weld, precision. At its first demonstration, General Guderian declares, "This is the embodiment of German genius." But every dream demands a price. The Panther is too heavy to build quickly, too complex to fix easily. The first 100 tanks sent to the Kursk front break down before they even fire. Maybach engines overheat, gearboxes split, and half of them burn out on their own. "Too perfect to live," writes one officer in his diary. Summer 1943, Operation Citadel. Panther rolls into battle for the first time. On paper, triumph. In reality, catastrophe. By the end of the first day, of 200 Panthers that began the attack, fewer than 80 remain operational. The rest crippled, aflame, out of fuel. Guderian is furious. "I asked for a weapon. They gave me an opera made of bolts. The army demands simplification. Berlin sends improvements instead, each one adding new parts, new fragility. 6 factories produce 6 slightly different versions. No 2 share identical components. Frontline mechanics salvage parts from wrecks to keep one running. A single repair can take weeks. Meanwhile, across the ocean, a Sherman rolls off an American assembly line every 30 minutes. Winter 1944. In the east, Panthers stall in mud and ice. Fuel congeals, oil thickens, transmissions freeze. A commander writes, "My tank is magnificent at parades and useless in snow." But in Berlin, the engineers refuse to simplify. A German tank must be a masterpiece. The soldiers answer, "Make it move." In that divide lies the downfall of German industry itself. When American troops capture Panthers in Normandy, they marvel at their precision. Then, within a day, all 3 break their gearboxes. One US engineer shakes his head. It's a masterpiece of over-engineering. A German tanker sits inside his Panther like a pianist at a grand piano, magnificent when every note works, fatal when one string snaps. An American tanker knew his Sherman like a worn guitar, simple, familiar, always ready to play. The Panther became a mirror of Germany itself, technically brilliant, spiritually brittle. It embodied the Reich's obsession with perfection, its pride, its blindness, and its inability to accept imperfection as survival. After the surrender, Allied engineers study the wrecks. The US NIBT report, 1946, concludes, outstanding gun and armor, but mechanically unreliable, vulnerable to maintenance neglect. In plain language, brilliant on paper, useless in war. They built a machine so perfect it forgot how to survive. Germany called theirs perfection. America built theirs to work. When an American tanker first climbed inside the M4 Sherman, he wasn't struck by the gun or the armor, but by the space. After the cramped, deafening vehicles of early war, the Sherman felt almost comfortable. 5 men, commander, driver, gunner, loader, radio operator, fit without crushing each other. Everything was labeled. Everything had its place. Each lever carried a simple tag. Every switch could be understood by touch alone. You didn't feel like you were climbing into a coffin, remembered a mechanic from the 2nd Armored Division. You felt like you were climbing into a workshop. The Sherman's secret wasn't its gun or armor. Its secret was accessibility. The Continental R975 engine could be replaced in 3 hours, the transmission in a single day. Every bolt, hatch and bracket was designed for the hands of a soldier, not an engineer. It was what Americans called a soldier's machine. Not perfect, not elegant, but theirs. From the rear, the Sherman hummed a deep bass note, the sound of the R975, a 9-cylinder, air-cooled aircraft engine. It didn't fear mud, water, or cold. It could start even when the tank was nearly dry, running on fumes and faith. "You could wake a Sherman with a wrench and a prayer," said one veteran. Inside, the designers had thought like tankers. The commander's cupola offered 360-degree visibility, and the driver could see directly ahead, a rarity in 1942. Germans joked that the Sherman can see its own death coming, but that visibility often saved its crew. Panthers had narrow hatches. When they burned, crews died trapped inside. Shermans had wide, spring-loaded escape hatches. Even a wounded man could crawl out. Later studies found that up to 80% of Sherman crews survived a hit, compared to barely 40% in German tanks. The hatch was our guardian angel. Every Sherman carried a SCR 508 radio. Crews could talk to infantry, artillery, and each other. German tanks. Only the platoon leader's vehicle had a transmitter. In battle, that meant one thing. The Americans fought as a network, the Germans as isolated giants. "Our tanks fought as one voice," said Lieutenant Richard Flynn. "Theirs fought as echoes." The small things made it human. Hooks for helmets, lockers for letters, a nail for a jacket. Some taped photos of home beside the periscope. One note, found years later in a wreck, simply read, "Don't forget to come back." "We lived inside it like inside a heartbeat," wrote another tanker. The Sherman's greatest flaw was fire. Early models stored shells along the hull walls. One hit and the tank became a torch. But in 1944, engineers introduced wet stowage. Rounds sealed inside water-jacketed bins. Fires dropped by half. Crews stopped calling it a death trap. In winter, the Sherman was warmer than any German tank. The engine's heat filled the crew compartment, and some units even piped warm air through ducts. Tankers brewed coffee on the armor, dried socks on the tracks. "A warm tank is a loyal tank," they joked. Shermans earned affectionate names: Old Betsy, Jenny, Faithful M4. Each crew gave their tank a name and a personality. It wasn't just steel, it was home. The design philosophy was simple. Enough to win. Enough armor to take a hit. Enough firepower to hit back. Enough simplicity to stay alive. No ornament, no obsession, only function. Built not to impress, built to endure. Post-war tests told the story. One Sherman ran 5,000 kilometers without major failure. A Panther broke down before 1500. An American engineer reading the report wrote, "Now we know why they came home and called her friend." The camera moves through the silent hull of a Sherman. Handprints on the levers, scratches on the armor, a chalk message near the driver's seat. "See you after the next one." It wasn't a perfect tank, but it was built for imperfect men trying to do the impossible. June 1944. France breathes smoke and rain. After the landings on the beaches of Normandy, the American Sherman tanks crawl through narrow country roads, between stone walls, hedgerows, and burning fields. They don't yet know that ahead of them waits not just an enemy, but a monster of steel and German engineering genius. The Panther. June 6, 1944, near Saint-Lô. A forward platoon of the 2nd Armored Division moves into a small village. Dust, diesel fumes, the hum of engines. At the crossroads, a flash. In an instant, Sherman Charlie 12 erupts in flames. The hatch bursts open. The crew leaps out, rolling into the mud. 800 meters away, a Panther. Just one. But one is enough to stop an entire column. Gunner Bill Harris recalled later, "We saw the flash first, then the sound hit us like a hammer. You don't fight a Panther, you survive it." The Panther was born for open fields, but Normandy wasn't open. It was a maze of trees and stone. The Americans quickly learned, you can't fight Germany on Germany's terms. They turned to speed, coordination, and deception. One Sherman drew fire, another flanked wide, a third struck from the side. You hit a Panther from the front, you die. You hit it from the side, it dies. They calculated the rhythm of death. From the first Panther shot to the second, 12 seconds. If the Sherman could move in that window, it lived. 12 seconds to live. That became the unspoken rule of Normandy. The fields burned, hedgerows crackled with traces. The air smelled of oil and fear. Commander Ray Hopkins wrote home, "The tank isn't a weapon anymore, it's a coffin you steer." But he drove on. They all did. Every village, another ambush, another Panther. Every victory bought with fire. At Carrington, the Sherman of John Miller's crew hit a Panther from the flank. The shell tore through the side, ripped the turret clean off. After the fight, the men approached to see this wonder machine. "We expected a dragon," Miller said, but inside it smelled like fear and gasoline. Beneath the armor, fragility, torn wiring, burnt oil, the body of a gunner frozen at the sight. By late June, American commanders had learned the truth. You don't beat the Panther with armor, you beat it with tactics. Shermans became hunters. Speed, teamwork, positioning. The new trinity. Every skirmish was a chess game fought in mud. Brigadier General Ernest Harmon said it best. "We don't duel, we dance." The Sherman's turret could turn twice as fast. It could pivot on its tracks, shoot on the move, and coordinate through radio. Advantages that couldn't be measured in millimeters. By July, Normandy was hell. Thousands of burned-out hulls on both sides. But the Americans kept advancing. Each destroyed Sherman wasn't the end, just another link in a chain stretching from the beaches to Paris. We buried our friends and kept driving, because the next tank was already waiting. By August, the Allies had learned to turn weakness into strength. Infantry shielded the tanks. Artillery and air cover moved in sync. And a new variant appeared, the Sherman Firefly, armed with Britain's 17-pounder gun. Now for the first time, the Sherman could kill a Panther head-on. And for the first time that summer, the Germans began to fall back. A Panther officer from the 12th SS Division wrote bitterly, "The Americans never stop. You kill one and 10 come back." That single line captured the war itself. The best tank didn't win. The army that refused to stop did. August 1944. An American column rolls into Paris. A Sherman named Liberty Bell crawls down the boulevard, its armor dusty, its crew smiling, waving to cheering crowds. The city salutes the tank once mocked as a death trap. The tank that wasn't supposed to win, says the narrator, rolled right into history. The camera lingers on a silent battlefield. Smoke, broken treads, two silhouettes, a Panther and a Sherman. Both quiet now, but only one will move again tomorrow. The perfect machine failed. The flawed one kept fighting. Autumn 1944. The war in Europe had become a race of machines. Not men against men, but philosophies of engineering clashing on the battlefield. On one side, Germany with its armored masterpieces, Panther, Tiger, King Tiger, steel giants, each weighing over 60 tons, each one a work of mechanical art. On the other, America, building the Sherman the same way it built cars, mass-produced, standardized, reliable. The Panther was a marvel. On paper, 45 km range top speed, a gun that could pierce 100 mm of armor. But a clogged air filter, a bent wheel, or a single rock could turn it into a silent fortress. The Sherman, by contrast, could break every day and be repaired within hours. Engines were standard, parts interchangeable. A mechanic with a wrench, oil rag, and cigarette could bring a tank back to life before lunch. You could fix her with a hammer and faith, said mechanic Joe Murphy. America hadn't just built a tank. It had built a support ecosystem. Every division had repair platoons. Every Sherman carried a toolkit. On the roads of France rolled not only tanks, but convoys of trucks loaded with engines, gearboxes, and gasoline drums. Germany could never match that. Each Panther was slightly different, and each breakdown was a disaster. They engineered perfection, but not endurance. Army Technical Reports, 1944, Statistic M4 Sherman Panther. Average operational readiness, 85%, 37%. Average repair time, 6 hours, 3 out of 5 days. Even if the Panther outperformed the Sherman 2-1, it couldn't get back into battle fast enough. Colonel John Heiss summed it up. A tank that moves is worth 10 that don't. Every hour of mobility decided battles. While German tanks waited for parts, the Shermans, dented, scarred, dirty, kept moving forward. The American doctrine was simple. Movement is life. Autumn rains turned France into mud. The Panthers sank after a kilometer. Tracks jammed, transmissions snapped, engines choked. The Sherman, lighter and simpler, just kept crawling, slowly, stubbornly, endlessly. We didn't win because we were fast. We won because we kept going. Reliability became morale. Every tanker knew, if the engine died, someone would come, fix it, and they'd drive again. For Germans, a breakdown meant abandonment. They'd blow up the tank and walk home. These men, covered in grease and rain, rarely appear in documentaries, but without them, no advance was possible. They welded armor at night, replaced engines in storms, and rebuilt tracks by hand. One scrawled on the side of a tank, "We fix what history breaks." In October 1944, American engineers captured several working Panthers. They tested them in Normandy. Within 3 days, none still ran. One overheated, one lost oil pressure, one froze its gearbox. A U.S. officer wrote in his report, "Enemy tank has beauty, our tank has stamina." The Sherman ran on standard gasoline. The Panther demanded rare, high-octane fuel, each barrel more precious as Allied bombers tore through supply lines. Only a third of the fuel ever reached the front. The Sherman. It could run on almost anything flammable. If it burns, it runs. The tankers laughed. After the war, German engineer Willy Heine wrote, "We thought of machines as art. They thought of them as tools. Tools win wars." That line entered military textbooks. Germany built a clock. America built a hammer. Both worked, but only one survived being dropped. By 1945, the US was building 20 Shermans for every Panther Germany produced. Even if 1 in 10 burned, the other 9 reached the fight. Perfection versus momentum. And momentum won. The camera fades over a muddy French road. A Panther, half sunken, its barrel tilted toward the ground. A Sherman, dented, splattered with clay, rumbling past under grey skies. The Germans built a masterpiece. The Americans built a survivor. Autumn 1944. From Normandy to the Ardennes, the roads crawl with endless lines of Shermans, trucks and fuel cans. Dust, diesel, cigarette smoke. The scent of a war built on motion. The Americans called it the Red Ball Express, the lifeblood of the Second World War. Without it, the Sherman was just a steel coffin. With it, it became the beating heart of victory. After the landings in France, the Allies faced a strange paradox. The farther they advanced, the hungrier the army became. Every single day demanded 800,000 gallons of fuel, 15,000 tons of spare parts, and 300 tons of bread. But America had prepared for this. Every nut, every wrench, every spark plug, numbered, boxed, tracked, and shipped. Germany built tanks. America built a system. August 1944, hundreds of GMC and Studebaker trucks thunder day and night from the ports of Normandy to the front lines. On their sides, bold white letters, Red Ball Express. Most of the drivers are African Americans, working 20-hour shifts on no sleep. "We weren't driving trucks," said Sergeant Clayton Brown. "We were driving victory. Without them, no Sherman would have reached Paris." Each Sherman devoured fuel, barely 2 miles per gallon. To cross France, the Allies needed a sea of gasoline. So they built one. Pluto, pipeline under the ocean. A steel artery laid beneath the English Channel, pumping 1,000 tons of fuel a day from Britain to the continent. While the Germans counted barrels, the Americans built rivers of gasoline. Panthers ran out of fuel. Shermans ran out of excuses. At every stage of the advance stood field workshops. A Sherman could be stripped down in half a day, given a new engine, new transmission, and sent back into the fight before sunset. In one logistics depot in France, over 10,000 men worked just to keep one armored regiment rolling. German tanker Hans Müller wrote bitterly in his diary, "They fight with trucks, not tanks. That's why they never stop." Every Sherman part was standardized. Tracks, bolts, filters, identical across thousands of machines. If something broke, any spare from any factory would fit. For German crews, it was a nightmare. Each Panther model had different dimensions, different bolts, different filters. A German mechanic opened his crate and found something almost right. But in war, almost right means wrong. While Germany obsessed over perfect tanks, America built roads, bridges, and depots. Every ton of concrete became a weapon. Every bridge, a gun that fired fuel. In Detroit, women welded Sherman hulls at the Chrysler Tank Arsenal, working around the clock. Posters on the wall read, "The sooner we weld, the sooner they come home." War had become an industry. The tank, its product. To the Germans, war was still a craft. To the Americans, it was mass production. Behind the front, maintenance convoys followed the armored columns. If a Sherman was hit or broke down, within an hour, another vehicle would tow it to the rear. Even abandoned tanks returned to battle within days. "We didn't lose tanks," one officer said. "We recycled them." When the Allies reached the Rhine, engineers built a bridge in 48 hours. The Panther was too heavy to cross. The Sherman rolled first. Engineer Bill Dixon laughed. That bridge was built for winners, not monuments. Historian Stephen Ambrose later wrote, "The Germans fought with courage. The Americans fought with gasoline." It wasn't mockery. It was the formula of modern war. Fuel flow was stronger than firepower. By December 1944, the Allies fielded over 25,000 Shermans in Europe. Germany, fewer than 3,000 Panthers, and half of those sat idle, dry, and empty. In the frozen fields of the Ardennes, the Sherman still moved when everything else stood still. "Wars aren't won by heroes," the narrator says softly. "They're won by the people who keep the heroes moving." Autumn 1944. No steel fights without a man inside, and no machine, not even the Sherman, means anything without those who drove it. They weren't soldiers born for war. They were farmers from Kansas, mechanics from Detroit, postmen from Ohio. Now they sat inside 30 tons of metal that could die in a single second. But inside those machines, something formed, what they called the Tank Brotherhood. Each Sherman was a small world of 5 men: the commander, the mind, the gunner, the eyes, the loader, the hands, the driver, the heart, the radio operator, the voice. 5 bodies, 1 breath. If one man failed, they all died. If one lived, it was because the others covered him. The tank was cramped, deafening, and reeked of gasoline. But inside, there was a strange tenderness. They shared their last cigarettes, slept shoulder to shoulder, and joked so they wouldn't lose their sanity. You don't fight for the flag. You fight for the guy sitting next to you. Sergeant Bob Klein, 4th Armored Division. In the archives, hundreds of letters remain. Most begin the same. "Dear Mom, I'm fine. The tank's running good." They never wrote about burned-out friends or how they pulled bodies from the hatches. They just wrote, "Don't worry." "War," one wrote, "is the lie we tell so our families can sleep at night." Mechanic Donald Fitz said he could recognize his tank by sound alone. When you've spent weeks inside one, you know her heartbeat. He could tell his own engine from a dozen others by the vibration of the floor. To them, the tank was alive, temperamental, loyal, with a soul of its own. They named them Baby, Lucky, Miss Missouri. Names painted in white chalk became their amulets. One crew wrote, "Death trap, but she's our girl." Even death turned into humor. After one battle, a commander lit his cigarette from the flames of a burning Sherman and said, "See? Told you she was a hot ride." Laughter was the only weapon that never jammed. After each fight, the Sherman sat in silence, its engine cooling, rain tapping on its armor. Inside, the men talked quietly about home, about girls, about what they'd do after. No one really believed that day would come, but they dreamed anyway, stubbornly, like only Americans could. Every man who went through Normandy knew fear, but fear became background noise, like the hum of the engine. "You don't stop being scared," one gunner wrote. "You just stop caring." War turned boys to stone, but beneath that stone, hearts still beat. When a tank was hit, they buried their friends beside the road, between wheat and mud. On the cross they wrote the man's name and the tank's. "Because we buried both," said one driver. Americans could replace tanks, but they tried to get their old one back. A new Sherman felt foreign, even if it was better. It's not the tank that keeps you alive. It's the memory of how the old ones saved you. They believed in luck, in their own hands, and in the stubborn faith that their old girl would carry them home. Before battle, commanders would rest a hand on the armor and whisper, "Do your job, sweetheart." The gunner tapped the barrel 3 times. The loader made the sign of the cross, prayers disguised as habits. "God didn't hear us," said one, "but she did." About the tank glory girl. When the war finally ended, many couldn't walk away. The Sherman had become part of them. Some cried. Others just sat on the armor and smoked. "We walked away," one wrote, "but she stayed." Out of 50,000 American tankers, almost half were killed or wounded. Those who came home didn't carry pride, only exhaustion. Historians would later say these men became the face of 20th century America, practical, stubborn, and alive. They say the tank won the war, but it was the men inside who made it move. August 1944, northern France. An American column moved cautiously through the morning fog, and there it was, a shadow the size of a house, a Panther, almost intact, abandoned by its crew. The turret frozen mid-turn, the engine still warm, the smell of burnt oil hung in the air, and on the dashboard lay a German newspaper, dated August 14th. For the Americans, it was a rare prize, a chance to look inside the machine that had become legend. Engineers from the 3rd Armored Division surrounded it. Sergeant Mechanic Bill Sloan ran a hand across the armor and grinned. "Looks like a cathedral. Let's see if it prays." They opened the engine hatch, checked the gears, the cooling system, the transmission. Within an hour, the motor stalled. 2 hours later, the gearbox overheated. First verdict: beautiful, but broken. The captured Panther was hauled to a U.S. test range near Cherbourg. For a week, American engineers measured every screw, every weld, every joint. They were astonished by the precision, as if the tank had been built for an exhibition, not a battlefield. But that precision came at a cost. Every part was hand-fitted. Nothing was interchangeable. If one shaft broke, you needed that exact shaft, from that exact factory. "It's an artist's tank," wrote engineer Frank Duval. But artists don't win wars. The Panther was heavier than anyone expected, 45 tons, too wide for Allied bridges, too hungry for Allied fuel. Its 730-liter tank lasted barely 160 kilometers. Every mile was a luxury. The Americans quickly realized the Germans had built a tank not for war, but for the perfect road that war never provides. Second week, they set up a captured Panther against a British Sherman Firefly. At 1,200 yards, the 17-pounder gun punched clean through the frontal plate. 3 minutes later, the Panther's engine caught fire. In the logbook, the engineers wrote, "High-velocity shell penetrated with ease. Fuel system vulnerable. Engine bay poorly protected." The myth of invincibility collapsed. Climbing inside, the Americans found a claustrophobic maze. Narrow seats, suffocating heat, almost no visibility. The commander could barely turn his head. The gunner had one small sight. "Like fighting inside a watch," said Lieutenant Bob Ames. "Precise, but one grain of sand, and it stops." The Sherman, by contrast, felt open, breathable, human. Every crewman had space, air, and a hatch of his own. To test further, the U.S. decided to operate a few captured Panthers under American command. All 3 failed, almost immediately. One overheated within hours. Another broke a suspension arm descending a hill. The third simply refused to start. "Enemy tanks require enemy mechanics," read the maintenance officer's report. In September 1944, the U.S. Ordnance Department issued document O-281, German PZK WW Panther, exceptional gun, poor mechanical reliability, low operational readiness. The conclusion was clear. The Panther was a weapon for short wars, the Sherman was a weapon for long ones. When American crews climbed into the captured tank, they expected to feel the menace of the enemy. Instead, they heard the groan of strained metal, smelled burning oil, and felt the suffocating tightness inside. "We didn't feel fear in it," one said. "We felt pity." Months after the war ended, those same Panthers stood rusting on American ranges, turned into target practice for the Shermans once called death traps. When German officers were shown the test footage, some refused to believe it. Oberleutnant Speyer protested, "You must have tested a damaged one." The Americans replied, "All of them were damaged by their own design." By 1945, the Allies understood the truth. German genius hadn't been defeated by American brilliance. It had been undone by American practicality. Complexity versus simplicity. Perfection versus endurance. Beauty versus survival. In the archives of the U.S. Army Ordnance, one note remains. The Panther, a magnificent failure, a fitting epitaph for the shining tragedy of German engineering. The Americans didn't destroy the Panther, they exposed it. After the war, the museums of America displayed a Sherman and a Panther side by side. Visitors stared at them like monuments to two different worlds. One, rough, square, industrial. The other, smooth, refined, almost a work of art. But the real gulf between them wasn't in shape. It was in philosophy. Veterans who walked those halls didn't talk about battles. They talked about the smell of oil, the hum of an engine, and that quiet superstition. If she starts today, we live another day. At a 1962 reunion, gunner Tom Wallace said, "I didn't love the Sherman, but I trusted her more than I trusted luck." That single line captured the American way of war. Not romantic, just reliable. Letters from those who came home still smell of fuel and scorched paper. One, found in the Iowa archives, begins, "Dear Dad, you wouldn't believe how loud she is. But when she's loud, it means we're still alive." Each tanker lived in the space between shells, between the engine starting and the next order. They kept going, not for ideals, but because motion itself meant survival. Historian James Goldstein once wrote, "The Sherman was never about armor. It was about accessibility, not just to mechanics, but to the human spirit." He was right. The Sherman wasn't built to inspire fear. It was built to endure it. A Sherman cost about $35,000, a Tiger $300,000, a Panther $120,000. For every German masterpiece, there were 10 American workhorses, and that ratio won the war. "Quantity has a quality all its own," Churchill said, watching the endless lines of Shermans roll east. But behind those numbers were hands. Thousands of welders, factory women, and frozen mechanics. Every bolt was a heartbeat. After the war, US and British engineers studied the two tanks. Their conclusion was simple. Perfection doesn't fight. Reliability does. That truth shaped every tank to come, from the M48 Patton to the modern Abrams. Build for the man, not for the museum. The Sherman's victory wasn't mechanical. It was psychological. The Americans didn't chase ideals. They chased results. They accepted chaos, mud, failure, and built a machine that could live through it. The Panther didn't fail from poor design, but from belief. The belief that war could be perfect. The Sherman proved the opposite. Victory belongs to those who can break and still move on. It wasn't just heroes who forged the outcome, but nameless men in oil-stained overalls. Every wrench was a weapon, every repair a gunshot. The 1946 U.S. Army report said it best. Every operational tank in Europe owes its life to one dirty pair of hands. That may be the truest sentence ever written about World War II. The Sherman became more than a tank. It became the spirit of 1940s America, a nation that believed work mattered more than genius, team mattered more than glory, and everything broken could be fixed. We can fix it. The Sherman outlived the war, serving in Korea, Israel, India, Egypt. A tank built for one conflict ended up defining a century. No Panther ever reached the 1950s, but the Sherman still rumbled across deserts and hills. In 1957, former Wehrmacht Major Klaus Richter admitted, "When we faced Shermans, we didn't fear them. We feared how many of them there were." It was the most honest compliment an enemy could give. America didn't win by brilliance. It won by scale, discipline, and endurance. Today, the Sherman stands in museums around the world. Visitors touch its cold armor, unaware of the sweat, fear, and life in every weld. It's more than a relic. It's a reminder that victory is built, not imagined. At a 1984 reunion in Ohio, an old tanker looked at a journalist and said, "The Panther looked better, but she stayed behind. Our girl made it all the way to Berlin." That one line ended 40 years of argument. You weren't perfect, but you were enough. Spring 1945. Berlin had fallen. Columns of Shermans rolled to a stop on German roads. For the first time in years, their engines fell silent. Soldiers climbed out, removed their helmets, and in that stillness, the war finally ended. But not for the machines. For them, it was only an intermission. Thousands of Shermans returned to the United States. Some went to museums, most to depots, repainted, refitted, and shipped out again to fight a new wars under new skies. Korea, 1950. The Sherman kicked up dust once more. Old tanks of World War II met new Soviet T-34s. History turned full circle. General Walton Walker said it best, "She may be old, but she can still fight." And she did. Climbing hills, rescuing infantry, breaking fortifications, just as she had a decade earlier. Still running, still reliable. The old hulls got new hearts, stronger engines, thicker armor, upgraded guns. Thus was born the M50 Super Sherman, a tank reborn for the deserts of Israel. It withstood heat, sand, and even duels with Soviet T-55s. The soldiers called it Grandpa with a Gun. 1967, the Six-Day War. Israeli Shermans swept across the Sinai. Outdated on paper, they won with discipline, precision, and speed. In one photograph, a Sherman named Moses stands on a hilltop, as if watching over the history it helped to write. While German Panthers and Tigers rotted in scrapyards, the Sherman kept serving in the armies of India, Chile, Turkey, Paraguay, even Cuba. It became the world's mechanical common language, useful anywhere, like an American wrench. The Sherman never retired. He just changed uniforms. By the 1970s, the men who had fought inside them were old. Some visited museums and ran their hands over the armor, the way one greets an old friend. One man tapped the steel and whispered, "Still solid." Others stood in silence, listening to ghosts in the quiet. Today, Shermans rest in museums across the world. In Patton Park, Bovington, the Smithsonian. Each bears dents, weld scars, and a name hand-painted in white. Beside them, a plaque reads, M4 Sherman, the tank that helped end tyranny. Visitors take photos. Children climb the tracks. Few realize that men once burned inside. But the Sherman doesn't ask for pity. It asks for memory. In American culture, the Sherman became a symbol, not of the perfect weapon, but of the one that worked. It embodied the can-do spirit that defined the nation, pragmatic, unromantic, unstoppable. Its legacy echoes in every Abrams, every F-16, every engineer who says, it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to work. Historian Rick Atkinson wrote, "The Sherman wasn't just a tank, it was the idea of America on tracks." And he was right. It wasn't brilliant, it was dependable. It wasn't a hero, but it carried heroes all the way to victory. At parades in the 1990s, you could still see Shermans rolling slowly past, their surviving crews aboard. Crowds stood and applauded. For them, the tank wasn't a relic, it was a memory of survival. "She got us there," one veteran said. "That's all that matters." Now, the Sherman rests quietly in parks across Europe. Grass grows around its tracks. Children play nearby. The war feels far away. But every bolt, every scar, is a trace of someone who once believed reliability is its own kind of heroism. We didn't build a legend. We built what outlived legends.